In the dead of night, deep in the quiet heart of Kent, England, history's most audacious heist was set into motion. It was February 21st, 2006, a night drenched in drizzle and shrouded in the kind of eerie calm that usually preludes a storm. Inside the Securitas Depot in Tonbridge, the hum of security cameras and faint echoes from cash-counting machines filled the air. It was a fortress of precision, designed to safeguard millions in unmarked cash. Yet by the break of dawn, it would become the epicenter of Britain's largest cash robbery. This was no ordinary break-in. In fact, it wasn't a break-in at all. What unfolded that night was the culmination of meticulous planning, rehearsed steps, and a chilling, calculated ruthlessness executed by a group of thieves who blur the line between brilliant strategists and criminals without a conscience. It all started several weeks before the heist, as the crew behind this operation began a complex reconnaissance mission. Their target, Colin Dixon, the depot's manager, quiet, unassuming, and unbeknownst to him, marked as the spearhead of their scheme. For weeks, his movements were monitored. They noted his routines, the route to work, his late-night stops, even the rhythms of his family life. Dixon, in their eyes, wasn't an individual. He was an access card. The plan ignited on the evening of February 21st. Around 6:30 p.m., Colin Dixon left work, locking up one of the most secure facilities in the country. As he drove down a quiet stretch of road, he noticed blue lights in his rearview mirror. A police car. Instinctively, he pulled over, but these weren't officers of the law. The men who approached Dixon were dressed the part, uniforms, caps, official demeanor, but what followed exposed their true intentions. Dixon was hauled into their vehicle and blindfolded. His protests and confusion were met with chilling silence. On that same evening, another part of the crew enacted the second leg of their scheme. A team of armed men arrived at Dixon's home, where his wife and young son were waiting. They posed as officers, convincing his family that Dixon had been in a serious accident and was in their protective custody. Once inside, their masks of authority slipped away, revealing the cold truth. Dixon's wife and son were taken hostage, and the stakes became horrifyingly clear. Dixon's compliance was not an option, it was a mandate. Hours crawled by as Dixon was moved under armed guard, eventually facing the stark walls of the Securitas Depot. His abductors gave him instructions: cooperate, or his family would never return home. At 1 a.m., Dixon, bound by fear, led the gang into the fortress he was entrusted to protect. The security mechanisms of the Securitas Depot were sophisticated. Layers upon layers of locks, access codes, and surveillance were designed to repel any external threat. But the weakness in this particular system wasn't mechanical, it was human. With Dixon's access card, the gang bypassed the alarms and checkpoints, descending into the vault. For the staff still inside the depot, the early morning hours became a nightmare. The gang rounded them up quickly, forcing them together in a corner. Guns were drawn, commands were barked, and fear clamped down on the room like a vice. One by one, staff members were ordered to open security cages, revealing stacks upon stacks of cash. It was a harvest ripe for the taking. This wasn't a rushed smash and grab. The gang had come prepared for a haul. A large lorry was stationed outside, its belly yawning open for the influx of duffel bags stuffed with millions in unmarked currency. They worked with chilling precision, fully aware of the ticking clock, yet fearless in their methodology. By the time the last bag was hauled out, they'd amassed a staggering £53 million in cash. As quietly as they arrived, the gang disappeared into the darkness. They left their hostages locked inside the depot, shaken but unharmed. For the first time that night, silence fell over the vault. But the damage was already done. When authorities were finally alerted, the scale of the crime sent shockwaves across the nation. The Securitas Depot robbery wasn't just remarkable for how much was stolen. It was the sheer audacity, the meticulous execution, and the psychological toll inflicted on Dixon and his family that set this crime apart. The investigation that followed was monumental. The Kent police, together with Scotland Yard, launched a massive operation to bring the perpetrators to justice. Surveillance footage from the depot provided the first breadcrumb, catching glimpses of the masked figures moving through the facility. Forensic teams combed through every inch of the depot, the getaway vehicles, and even surrounding areas, hunting for leads. But perhaps the most critical leads came not from the scene of the crime, but from its aftermath. When you steal 53 million pounds in cash, hiding isn't easy. In the days following the heist, authorities began detecting small but significant cracks in the robbers' meticulously laid plans. Suspicious transactions started to pop up. Individuals linked to the gang were discovered making extravagant purchases, luxury cars, properties, and even attempts to launder the loot in the underground economy. One of the gang's crucial mistakes, their pyramid of trust started to collapse. Informants and acquaintances of suspected gang members came forward. Slowly but surely, the identities of those involved began surfacing. From muscle for hire to logistics planners, the web of connections traced itself back to a ringleader, Lee Murray, a volatile and flashy individual who had a knack for organized crime. Murray himself became an almost mythic figure during the investigation. A former MMA fighter, his larger-than-life persona and reputation for risk-taking drew attention as the alleged mastermind behind the operation. But Murray's bravado would prove his undoing. In June 2006, following a grueling international manhunt, Murray was apprehended in Morocco, where he'd fled to evade British authorities. His arrest was dramatic. Rebels don't go quietly, but it marked a turning point in the case. Back in the UK, trials unfolded one by one. Co-conspirators were identified, prosecuted, and sentenced. The severity of their punishments reflected the scale of their crime. But even with key players behind bars, the story of the Securitas Depot robbery felt unfinished. The central question remained unanswered. Where was the money? Of the 53 million pounds stolen, only a fraction was ever recovered. The rest seemed to vanish into a black hole, a mystery that still confounds investigators to this day. Was it smuggled out of the country, distributed among shadowy networks? Theories abound, but definitive answers remain elusive. For the victims, particularly Colin Dixon and his family, the scars run deeper than any financial loss. The psychological trauma of that night left lasting imprints, evidence of a crime more faceless and far-reaching than just a stack of stolen cash. As newsworthy as it was infamous, the Securitas Depot robbery became the blueprint of a modern-day heist, high-tech yet brutally intimate, audacious yet deeply flawed. It's a story people still tell, partly out of fascination, partly out of horror, and entirely because of its staggering scale. And so, 53 million pounds hangs in the air, Britain's largest missing fortune. Somewhere out there, in forgotten vaults or scattered across the globe, the cash remains a silent testament to a crime whose legacy will endure for decades to come.